And I think we are recording. Good. Okay. So I think those are the basic. I guess I'll talk a little bit about today. Just a reminder that when we have the two different Zoom rooms, so there's two other events that are on Zoom number 2. So you have to go to that. I just don't want people to miss that. Of course, the first one we Zoom collection development in the morning with Gail Santee. She is joining us, going to be joining us from a hotel. She's on the road. She has a family wedding. So that's great that she's going to be able to join us today to do that. Then we have on Zoom 2, Wanda Brown in the morning. Of course, the business meetings on Zoom 1. In the afternoon, we have on Zoom 1 the primetime programming from Chanute Public Library. And then we have on Zoom 2, the community outreach at the end there. So, okay, I think I remembered everything. So let me go ahead and just introduce Roger real quickly and then have him get going. We're excited. Roger, of course, has been with SEKLS for almost 29 years, if I got that correct. And that he's going to be doing his the keynote for us, which is a great honor, and talking about reflections on a career. So go ahead, Roger, and we'll let you take over.
Okay, thanks. Actually, I'm going to start by introducing someone else. Sharon Moorland is our new director. Some of you, actually by now, quite a few of you have met her, but others have not. And those who haven't met her in person yet may have seen her on the forum the other day. But anyway, Sharon, I'm going to turn it over to you to kind of say a few more things if you'd like to.
Thank you, Roger. Appreciate that. I wanted to say welcome. Thank you, everybody, for the warm welcome. As Roger said, we've been out visiting libraries. We have visited 28 so far, and we still have 36 to go. And I have really enjoyed exploring Southeast Kansas. Roger has made me drive so I can learn where I'm going. I appreciate that. And we've been meeting everybody and getting to tour their libraries, which as a librarian, that's one of my favorite things to do, to see how everybody sets up their library. So that's been fun. And, you know, as we're out there just talking to everybody, I really appreciate hearing your concerns, your challenges, and the, I'm going to call it the glorious return of patrons to your library, and seeing what everybody is doing for summer reading, which I think, well, I'm happy to hear that summer reading is beginning to get people back in the door. Slowly, we're returning to normal, and I know that we all appreciate that. Roger has definitely gone above and beyond to prepare and orient me for this position, and he is setting me up for success, and I want to say thank you to him for that. This is the first position I haven't been thrown in the deep end, so I think that with his support, this transition is going to lead to really great things. And I say that he could give a master class in succession planning. What he has done is just fabulous, and I very, very much appreciate it. And I look forward to working with everybody to move our libraries forward and to meet the needs of our communities and our students. So thank you. And I look forward to meeting everybody that I haven't and working with you to just make things, continue to make things more normal. So thank you so much.
Okay, thanks. This is not going to be your usual keynote this morning. You know, you usually have a speaker for a keynote session who is teaching you something, giving you some good information, something worthwhile that you can learn from. You're not going to learn anything from today that's worthwhile, probably. Or if we don't have that, we've had an author who you might learn some from, but is more for entertainment. And I guess it remains to be seen whether you'll be entertained today or not. But anyway, it's going to be anything but the usual keynote, but I do appreciate the chance to deliver it and sort of a farewell, although I have 3 more weeks on the job. I'm calling my keynote Reflections on a Career. If that doesn't sound interesting to you, you feel free to leave at this point. It is hard for me to seem that it's real. I think if I heard Eric right, he said 39 years. It's actually 29 years, almost 29 years that I've been here. In early August, it would have been 29 years. And it's nearly over. And I have a hard time quite having that sink in, even though I know that it's true. I hope you'll indulge me a little bit today as I look back and reminisce for a little bit. And I will try to leave time at the end. So if you have any questions you want to ask or any comments, you will have time to do that as well. The first thing that I want to take note of is just how young I was at the time. I was only 35 years old. I'm going to share the screen for a minute of a picture of me that was in the Iola Register. Not right when I started work. I didn't, you may know that I began work in August, but strictly for SEK, and then as a consultant, but with the understanding that on January 1st, I would become the director. And so January of '93, when I became director, is when this was, is when this picture is from. Okay, so there's a picture of me at age 35 as I began the position. But I also want you to notice here the caption, and I don't know if you can see it there, so I've got a closer up. David Carswell is the new director of Iola Public Library and Southeast Kansas Library System. I will defend the Iola Register by pointing out that they had my name right in the article. It was just in the caption that it was wrong. So, and I'm going to stop the sharing now. I will have other pictures I'll show a little later, but this is not primarily a picture show or a PowerPoint. And I want to give a quote that kind of resonates me from Abraham Lincoln. And those of you who know me know I'm much into history. I don't intend to compare myself to that great man, but I will say this does resonate. And this comes from when he took his leave of the citizens of Springfield, Illinois, to go to Washington to take up the presidency. And he said, my friends, no one, not in my situation, can appreciate my feeling of sadness at this parting. To this place and the kindness of these people, I owe everything. Here I have lived a quarter of a century and have passed from a young to an old man. There are two parts of that particularly that resonate with me. Certainly the part about passing from a young to an old man. I was 35 years old then, 64 years old now. And the part also about to the kindness of these people, I owe everything. Thank you all for the part you had in my time here and what it has been. And I think it has been a success. I'm going to talk just a little bit about some things I think that have changed much for the better during that time. But I do feel like I owe everything to you all. And I'm speaking broadly, not just to you who are here, but those of you who have been at your libraries and on the boards and on my staff at various times, but are not here today. I do owe it all to you. And I mean this both for staff and librarians. I'm really proud of what we've done together, both staff and librarians. And I will say, thanks for making me look good. I appreciate that. So back to the age, as I said, I was only 35 years old, and just how that was received at the time when I came to work at SEK, which actually was fine, but I was almost the youngest person on staff. Brenda Cash and Melissa Sponsler, who are still on staff, were younger than me, but I think probably they were the only ones other than the student employees we had for Iola Public Library. And here I was directing all these people, many of which were past normal retirement age, in their late 60s or 70s even at that time. And some of them had been here for a long, long time, almost since the beginning of the system, really. And At the time I came here, SEK had only had 2 previous directors, Lucille Wagner and Ray Wilson, and they were both still working here, which made an interesting dynamic. I mean, it could have been setting me up for failure in some ways to have both previous directors still working here. The way that worked was this. With Ray, it was fairly short term. I'll talk more about how I got the job later, but we had some overlap time, almost a year in that case, and he stepped down as director, but continued on the staff for a few more months. But then also Lucille, and she had come back to work for SEK just shortly after she retired in 1978, working part-time doing acquisitions and then in technical services or cataloging. And at the time I came here, she wasn't working very many hours. It was kind of irregular days. She would kind of came and went as she wanted and worked on what she wanted. So like, as I said, the dynamics of that were really interesting, that here I was a brand new director and very young, and both previous directors were still working here. With Lucille, there are just a couple things I want to relate that, you know, shows she, I don't know how it could have been a problem, but did not turn out to be. I had to tell her no on a couple of things, which made it uncomfortable, but needed to be done. And one of those things was she got this idea that we wanted to redo all the call number labels in the library. She thought, besides the call number and the author name on it, and we had full author names on it, that we ought to then also put the first word of the title on as a third line. And not only was that just an incredible amount of work to do, but I thought it would be awfully confusing to patrons to read that sort of a label. And so one of the staff members, Sally Husky, came to me and said, "This is what Lucille is starting us on doing." And I had to go to Lucille and say, "No, we're not going to do that." And she took it in good grace. I will give that to her. She also came to me, she caught me aside one day when no one else was listening, says, "You know, we should never have gone to 2 pay periods a month. When I was director, it was just 1 pay period a month. We should go back to that." And so I had to tell her no on that as well. But also the fact, besides that I was working with 2 previous directors and with staff that was mostly much older and had deeper roots here than I, that kind of made me the outsider in some ways. Lucille was the original director of SEK, and she'd already at that time been director of Iola Public Library since 1958. And then following her was Ray, who came to work for Lucille in the very early years of the system and was sort of her right-hand man, and was the logical successor. So after Ray, I was the first one to kind of come in from outside, and that you never know how you're going to be received. So that obviously could have been a problem. It did not turn out to be one. I thank the few staff who are here now, Brenda and Melissa, but also those who were former staff, were part of it, for you know, accepting me so openly. I'm sure there was some wariness at first, and they were kind of watching me probably and seeing how I would do, but they welcomed me very well, and I appreciate that. And I know they're welcoming Sharon in the same way. So in that 29 plus, or almost 29 years, lots of has changed, obviously, mostly for the better. I want to take stock of some of the advances for SEK libraries. Of course, you know, the biggest change in libraries in that time is the increasing amount of technology, particularly the internet and automated systems. I really obviously can't take much credit for the internet. We didn't realize it at the time, but the internet was bearing down on us like a steamroller. There's nothing that would have prevented it. And libraries, whether they are in a place which had a regional library system to work with them or not, have adapted to that. So I don't know that situation is much more different than if SEK hadn't been here or wasn't doing anything. But I will say, I do think we moved libraries along a little more quickly than they might have otherwise. We at least were available to give advice. It was a kind of a funny thing. Some libraries, of course, were reluctant to make the internet available once it became possible to get it in their communities. I remember one library in particular that said, well, why doesn't SEK just do the internet? Let's just go ahead and do what we normally do. And when we want the internet, we'll call you. And it was obvious even at that time, that this person had no real understanding. And she developed an understanding. But obviously that was kind of a non-starter. There was no way we could be, they would call us if they needed information from the internet, basically, and we'd give it to them. One of the areas where I can take more credit, I think, is our continuing education program. That was one of my very first priorities. When I first came to SEK, there had been some times in the past where there were more, not anything like we have now, but at the time I came to SEK, for quite a few years, there'd basically been only maybe one or two continuing education sessions. I guess two. There was the summer reading workshop, and there was some speaker at the, which would have been the annual meeting, which at that time was in November. And at the June meeting, we strictly had a book fair and a business session, I think. So basically 2 continuing education events per year. And I knew coming into it, it's one of the few things I knew coming into it, but I knew coming into it, we really needed to beef up our continuing education. So even that very first few months I was here before I became director, I planned an ILDP workshop. That was the Interlibrary Loan Development Plan at the time, and how to write grants for that, as well as a trustee workshop, which hadn't been done in years. And then the next, and it kind of just built from there. Over the next few years, we built it up to a very robust continuing education program. A year after, or a little more than a year after I started, Harry Willems was hired as the first director that I hired. He's I saw logged in today, so thank you, Harry, for really developing the continuing education program. We worked together on that real well, I think. Another thing where there's been a lot of advance in SEK libraries is the state of automation. We had 52 public libraries at the time. There were maybe 4 public libraries that were automated, in the sense of having an automated circulation system and catalog. And of course, none of those catalogs were on the web. No one had the internet. So from just four public libraries that were automated then, our very last public library is now automating, is just less than 2 weeks away from going live with an automation system. They're joining Seek and Find. So I'm glad to be leaving a system where every single public library has automated. That didn't happen real fast. It eventually happened quickly, but up until 2006, automation proceeded more or less as a local matter. We did do some consultation on that, but in 2006, that's when grant funding became available for regional automation projects, and we jumped right on that. And through that project, we automated another 28 libraries. In time of 2006, there were still 29 public libraries out of 53 then that were not automated. And 28 of those, I think, have automated through what became our Seek and Find project. It wasn't initially Seek and Finder with Koha, but our cataloging staff traveled to these libraries, worked in the libraries, brought books back here to catalog, and altogether we automated 28 of those 29 libraries. I think there was just one exception of the library that in that period automated entirely on their own and not as part of the Seek and Find project. So I feel really good about that, about getting all libraries automated, and particularly what we were able to do with the, as I said, what became the Seek and Find project. Another area where I think things have improved greatly is our technical support. We did not have a single technology or automation consultant on staff when I came here, and that's also something that I realized very quickly we needed. Not long after Harry was hired, I hired Brig McCoy as our first, what we called then as an automation and technology consultant. We've since expanded. We have 3 people in our technology services department now who do technology support, and that entire service has come to be in the time I've been here. One thing that people may not think about so much, but are the state of their catalogs, because most libraries had, if they had a catalog at all, and most had something at least, had a card catalog. But just how bad those catalogs are, I can say it now. The state of the catalogs was absolutely terrible. It wasn't the case of every library. The larger libraries, what were then known as the core libraries, I think all had good workable catalogs where people could find books and be directed to where they were at in the library. And beyond the core libraries, there were at least probably half a dozen or more possibly that had good catalogs. But the majority of the libraries, they were just abysmal. You know, they weren't up to date. They weren't filed right. They didn't have any real concept of what a shelf list was and what it was used for. And the system had from the beginning been trying to improve catalogs. The cataloging department, those of you who worked then will tell you there stories of libraries that they went to for months on end, cataloging down there and sending them catalog cards, which is what we provided at that time, and then would find out later that they'd done nothing with the cards that was sent to them, and just broke their hearts almost to go to these libraries and see hundreds of hours of staff time just gone to waste because the cards were never filed. And if they did maintain, they were in such bad shape. They probably didn't list all the books that they did have. They listed lots of books that were years lost and just abysmal. We wasted a lot of time on trying to get good card catalogs and didn't really make much headway on that, I think. All libraries have good catalogs now that pretty accurately reflect what's in their collections without having a lot of dead junk that's no longer in the collection. And that's mostly because of catalog. And frankly, mostly because most libraries are in Seek and Find, are really through Seek and Find. So I'm really glad that we have brought those catalogs along where they're really usable now. Another area you might not think about are policies. Most public libraries in Southeast Kansas did not have any effective written policy statement. Most of them didn't have any written policies at all. And even the larger libraries, one of our very largest libraries had a one-page policy that tried to cover all bases. Well, the things that need to be in a good policy. And that was not going to cut the mustard. But so by making policies, and particularly certain policies, part of our grant criteria for the allocation, we got pretty much all libraries moved into the place where they have some workable policies in place. Another area has to do with weeding. Of course, that's an ongoing thing. And if you look at libraries now, and as you do sometimes probably look at your own and say, boy, I really need to weed. You have no idea how much libraries need to be weeded at that time. And in most cases, except for the very largest libraries, most libraries, I don't think it ever weeded, ever. And so we did a lot of weeding as a staff for quite a few years. luckily, we've got librarians pretty well trained to be weeding on their own now. So that's an area. And then director pay or librarian pay, but specifically looking at the directors. You may think we're not in a very good position now, and we're certainly not. Library budgets are low. Lots of our librarians do a great job, just are not paid commensurate with what they should be. However, it is better than it was then. We had libraries at that time that were paying sub-minimum wage, which was not legal even at that time, but yet they did it. And in most cases, it was they thought they were getting around the minimum wage law by saying we'll pay the librarian $200 a month, and they might work hours that would equate to $1 an hour or something like that at that point. And well, probably not as low as that, but pretty low. But then besides those who were actually paid some minimum, there were lots of others that were just at minimum wage. As I looked at the latest statistics just a few weeks ago, I found we have no library director that's at minimum wage or below. And I knew it'd been many years since we'd had anyone that was below, but no one's even at minimum wage. In fact, of all the 54 public libraries now, there are only 2 that are even within 25 cents of the minimum wage, 5 more that are between 75 cents and $1.50 above minimum wage. And everyone else pays at least $3 above minimum wage for the director. So I feel really good that we have moved libraries along, at least to that extent. There's still a long way to go, but that's a good thing. The next area where I see such improvements is in programming, because there was very, very little programming going on in libraries at that time outside of children's services. And even in children's services, not nearly as many libraries had a story time, I think, as do now. Most, I think, did participate in summer reading program at least, but there was virtually no adult programming. One or 2 programs a year for a library, which did in some sort of programming, and a lot did no sort of programming. Another area is funding our libraries from SEK. I'm talking about our public libraries and the allocations now. So I look back, and the grants that we gave the first year were amounted to 23% of our total budget. Last year, that had risen to 36% of our total budget. So better than a third of all money we receive, we turn around and grant back to libraries for various things. And allocations alone have gone from 22% of budget in that year to 28% of budget currently. When I sign those allocation checks that go to smaller libraries now, I look sometimes without looking at the library, I'll look at the amount, and then I'll look at the library. Oh, wow, they're receiving more now. Some of our smallest libraries are receiving now more than the current libraries did at that time. Granted, that's been 29 years and the dollar's not the same, but it's also been a time of low inflation relatively. So I'm glad how we've moved that forward. But beyond the allocations, the new grant programs we've had, the competitive grant program that started as a service development grant in around 1996, and that has been something that's been consistent ever since. So we didn't have that competitive grant program. We didn't have a continuing education grant program. We didn't have the DREAM grant program. We didn't have the programming grants. We didn't have the academic extended service grants. We didn't have the courier subsidies, although there was a less generous postage reimbursement once upon a time that had, for budget reasons, been discontinued the year before I came to SEK. And we reinstituted that to some degree, maybe a couple of years into my tenure here, but then have increased the amounts put into that, and particularly to subsidize the courier. So that's mostly a new thing there. So anyway, altogether, we've increased our grants from 23% of our total budget to 36%. And then another area where I see a lot of improvement, but it is an area where SEK can take less I would say recognition for than in some of these other areas are in buildings. I count that since I started, 12 public libraries are in new buildings. 12 more have made additions to their buildings, and 5 more are in a different building. That is, they moved to a different facility. They renovated some existing building and moved the library to it. We had a role in some of those, and in others we didn't. We're always glad to come out and look at plans and look at potential locations and potential buildings, give advice on floor plans and so forth. And we have done that on some of these libraries. Others we did not, but that is an area of improvement. We have a lot better, and we certainly don't have, although we have small libraries, the very smallest ones at that time you would not believe. The smallest ones we have now are much bigger. So once again, that's the end of that part of it. I am proud of what we have done together. If you'll indulge me a bit more, I'm going to tell some more personal background of how I came here to begin with. First of all, I never really intended to be a librarian. I intended to be a history teacher. And I started looking at other areas of certification in order to increase my employment prospects. And I decided on library work. And the more I got into that, the more I got interested into that angle of it. And, you know, that's where I ended up. I went to work first as a student employee at the McPherson College Library, or Miller Library, in 1978. And since that time, or at least since the fall of 1978, I've never worked anywhere except a library since. So, you know, that's 43 years, I guess, a long time. At McPherson College, after I graduated from college, I was given the chance to stay on the staff in a full-time during the school year position as a clerical assistant. I did interlibrary loan, managed the circulation desk, and handled periodicals. Those were the main things I did there. I have one item that I have taken with me, that I got at McPherson, that I've taken with me in every job since. It's sat on my desk for 40 years now, 41 years probably. First off, we had a number of little blocks of wood like this. I don't know if you can see, it has a place put in it where you can put a sign holder, and it was designed, I think, to go along with displays, but there were a whole bunch of these and weren't really being used. And I asked Rowena Olson, the library director there, whether I could have one of them, and she gladly gave me one. And I used my IBM Selectric typewriter, put a big head on it with a large print font on it, and typed on little cards like this some of my favorite scripture verses. And I have had a stack of those about that thick that I have carried with me ever since. So ever since on my desk, I have this piece of wood with scripture verses on it. My couple of my favorites over there. This one really fit me at the time and kind of resonated with me. It doesn't fit me so well anymore, because it starts, how can a young man keep his way pure? But it still kind of resonates with me. It's, how can a young man keep his way pure? By guarding it according to thy word. With my whole heart I seek thee. Let me not wander from thy commandments, which is from Psalm 119. And then one from Colossians, whatever your task, work heartily as serving the Lord and not men. And that's kind of been my approach. That's what I try to do in reality day to day, work heartily whatever the task is, and not necessarily receive I want to say the approval of men, although I have in some to a large degree, but that's not so important to me. And I will also say, when I'm talking about this right now, I have approached every job and every major decision with prayer. That's been a part of it, on any major decision, and certainly on many smaller ones as well. Well, from McPherson, I went into a school. By the time I finished at McPherson, I'd started library school and had finished my certification. So I went to a school district, the Peabody Burns School District. That was my first professional level experience. That was in 1981. In February of 1981, they had a mid-year opening that year. And so I went to that and was there for another 2 full years after that. And I was put on this was my first place where I was put on some sort of a statewide, study or work. I was put on the COM catalog task force. That was, the COM catalog stood for computer output microfilm, and it was how it was the first version of the Kansas library catalog that came out on a roll of microfilm. And I had gotten used to that, using it for interlibrary loan at McPherson College. And I was one of the few school librarians who had any understanding of that. And so Rowena Olson, my former employer at McPherson College, she was chairing that task force, and she called me and asked me if I would serve on it. So I did that and got to know several other people there. So that was my first getting my toe wet in some statewide projects and issues. Then I went to Wellington High School for a couple of years, moved from there to Emporia Public Library. Largely at Emporia Public Library, I did reference work. That was back when libraries did a lot of reference work. That's fallen off quite a bit since then. But primarily I did reference work and material selection. I was in Emporia from 1985 to 1991. All 3 of my children were born during that time, so Emporia has some really good memories for me. I really liked Emporia. I should say I was head of adult services. That was my title. When I first got there, I was handed the job. I said, we have signed up for the Let's Talk About It program that's being done in, I don't remember how many libraries, 12 or so across the state through a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities and Iola. We're slated to be one of them. You're in charge of that here in Emporia, which I knew nothing about at the time, but we had a successful one, and the state steering committee for humanities programs in libraries, which was kind of a joint committee with the Kansas Humanities Council, or at that time it was the Kansas Committee for the Humanities, and some librarians statewide. They asked me to join that committee, in fact, to be chair of it. So I was chair of that for several years. So there again, I got involved in some statewide projects. That also meant that when I moved to Emporia, that was my first public library. I had been in a professional position in a school library. I had been in a clerical position in an academic library. So I've worked in all 3 major types of library. I have never worked in a special library as a 4th one, but all 3 of the larger categories, academic, school, and public libraries I've worked in. I'm probably one of the few who can say that, and one of the few regional library directors that can say that. And I think that has had an influence on how I've approached the job. From Emporia, after 6 years at Emporia, I went to Pittsburgh Public Library as the director there. And Pittsburgh was not the library then that it is now. I will tell you, it's what I sometimes refer to as an underperforming library. Its budget was they were very, very underfunded. I think it was 2 something mils. I mean, somewhere between 2 and 3 mils, and a budget of around $200,000 a year. And had suffered from several years of neglect under the previous director, I would say would be fair to say. And the library board had gotten rid of that director and hired me, and they were interested in moving forward. I immediately went in and saw all the things that needed to be done and was starting to do those. And I won't go into that because I'm going to run out of time if I do, but that was a good experience. And that's where Ray Wilson got to know me. I was only in Pittsburgh for a little over 1 year. After a year there, Ray was looking to retire. He came recruiting to find his successor. It was kind of an unorthodox approach, but he came and asked me if I would be willing to come succeed him as director. And the way we work, it would be this way. I would start work as soon as I could. It turned out to be August of '92. And at the end of that year, we would switch jobs, and he would become consultant and I would become director, and then he would retire the next year. So that's what we did. I came to SEK with really no agenda. I didn't, beyond knowing already that there needed to be a stronger continuing education program, and realizing very quickly the need for automation and technology consulting. I really didn't have an agenda when I came here. I told someone I'd worked with at Emporia Public Library, who had since finished her master's degree and was branch director at the Springfield Greene County Library in Springfield, Missouri, that I said, I'm excited about this job, but I'm a little nervous too, because when I came to Pittsburgh, I immediately had a big agenda. I knew what needed to be done. And said, I don't really have an agenda for the system. She said, well, you'll develop one. And she was right. It didn't take long to develop one. And I appointed also an advisory committee of people whose judgment I trusted, representing different types and sizes of libraries. And we met together over the course of quite a few months. And then they made a report in we made a report, I should say, in mid-1993 that had a lot to do with the direction we ultimately went in. I want to give a shout out to the staff and librarians who have stuck it out for my whole tenure here. As I mentioned before, there are only 2 staff members, Brenda Cash and Melissa Sponsler, who have been here from the beginning for me and are still here. And there are only 3 directors or head librarians of any type of library. They're all public library directors. There are 3 of them. Andrea Soba at Garnett, Connie Mitchell at Eureka, and Frida Edwards at Altamont are the only remaining public library directors, or library directors actually of any type of library that have been here during my whole tenure. For other staff other than library directors, I can't really track that very well, but I really only know of a few. There can't be very many. I can think of Becky Galindo at Pittsburgh, who worked there when I was at Pittsburgh, Richard Samford at Axe Library at Pittsburgh State University, probably, but not certainly, Susan John Smith from Pittsburgh may have been there the whole time. Janet Reynolds at Lacine, I think, has been there. Well, she at least was this way, because she was a school librarian also before I think she was at the public library as well. She may have been a librarian during the whole time. And then Phyllis Coombs at Lebec Community College. And I saw she was on the attendance list today. So hello, Phyllis. Of the non-director staff, I kind of think these are the only ones. They're certainly the only ones I know about that have lasted this whole time. I have worked with a total of 234 public library directors. That's only counting individuals. There were also 5 or 6 people who were employed as directors and then left and then came back to be directors again later, but just 234 individuals. Besides the improvements we have, I just want to quickly hit some of the highlights I think of during the time I've been here. One was getting our first automation and technology consultant. Another was finishing Iola's automation project. We finished that, close to finished it up with a barcoding party to get all the books barcoded. We used staff and friends as volunteers. We closed the library on a Friday at noon, and I think worked through the weekend and then Monday to barcode the library and got it almost all done. We called it a BYOB party, a barcode your own book party. And that was actually, it was a big chore, but it was a lot of fun as well. Instituting the competitive grant program, I think, is a highlight. Starting Westminster Woods, well, it's no longer Westminster Woods because they're only renting to church groups now. But the in-service day that became Westminster Woods, that was, again, largely due to Harry. He and I went out and visited several possible sites starting that. But that was a highlight. The Seek and Find project certainly has been a highlight and has done so much to move things forward. Lots and lots of consulting. I would tell a few stories, but I think I'm going to skip those for the most part because I'm getting low on time. But it's been good to help libraries out of tough situations, or hopefully avoiding them getting into tough situations to begin with, and making improvements in library service. It's real gratifying when you see a library really making an improvement through some advice or help you've given them. The building renovation, when we renovated the public library here, but that also meant the SEK offices. I think that was a highlight, and I don't think she's here. Maybe she's joined later, but Kim Rutter deserves a lot of the credit for the SEK offices because she headed a committee that designed the layout of those and talked to different vendors and selected one, and every staff member got to customize their own area, the furniture that was going in it and so forth. So that was good. One other highlight for me, I'd mentioned my work at Pittsburgh, and after I'd moved to Iola in August, I got this nice note in the mail at Christmas time. It says, and it's from a patron down there, and it starts, "Thank you for administering CPR to the Pittsburgh Library." And so that was nice. I kept that, and I'm going to take that with me too. Another highlight for me was the year I was KLA president. I guess I should say KLA, being president of KLA was a highlight, but what I really am remembering from that is giving a KLA presidential award that year to Rowena Olson, who was my first library boss, and she richly deserved it. And I'm going to say that the KLA president, although it's named the Presidential Award, does not pick those recipients. There's a separate committee for that. And I had no input or no knowledge of who was nominated or let alone who was selected until that information was given to me. But I was so delighted when I found out that Rowena was one of the recipients, and that was a real highlight. Another highlight was celebrating the Iola Public Library Centennial in 2005, the KLA Centennial in 2000. One of my last acts as KLA president was to appoint a committee, which included me, to plan the KLA Centennial, and that I think came off very well. And then celebrating SEK's 50th anniversary in 2016. On here, I need to go back over and show some photos again. So I'm going to share the screen here. Let's see. First, I guess I need to exit here. Let's see. There we go. My cursor is disappearing. All right, here we go. Oh yeah, here's the SEK 50th anniversary logo. Another highlight was, I didn't record here the year this was, but receiving the Dwayne Johnson Library Leadership Award. This is an award given by Friends of Kansas Libraries and named after the longtime outstanding state librarian, Dwayne Johnson. And then a highlight for me was instituting the Excellence Awards. 2018 was the first year for that. And Karen Eshelman, here I am giving her a $1,000 check for the Howard City Library. She was the first, among the first group that first year who received awards. And then some of you will remember, but some of you won't, the Kansas Library Month was a short-lived thing, and working with Stan Hurd, who is a noted crop artist, and he designed this, and this is a field. All the colored things you see around the perimeter of this field, those are people laying down. So that gives you the size, some idea of the scale of this. And I got to help plant some of the flowers that were in here. And then I got to go up in a helicopter with Stan Hurd and the helicopter pilot to look at this from the air. So that was something that was very memorable for me. Oh, actually, I guess I still want to share a screen here. Yeah. I'm moving on from highlights to just a few potpourri sort of things. Some of you will remember Ducky. This is her with the duck hat. She was one of the longtime SEK employees. When I came here, was head of cataloging, and Ducky was a name that her family and everyone knew her by. And she had made a hat out of some bubble wrap that came, really excessive bubble wrap that came in a package we got, and had some fun with that. And so some of the staff got together and decided for her birthday, we needed to make her a hat. I wasn't involved in it, but so they made her this duck hat and feet and had some fun with that. And but because of that, they decided we're going to make a hat for everyone for their birthday that year. So when it came my birthday, let's see, I'm going to exit or stop sharing the screen now so that I can show you something, show you my hat. They decided, well, as director, I needed a band director style hat. So they got a lampshade and they made it into a director style hat, which you see here. And also because I wear two hats for Iola Public Library and SEK, it's two-sided. This side says Iola, this side says SEK. So that was my hat. I think that was one of the more creative of the hats made that year. I'm going to go back and share the screen for a few more photos here. For many years, the state kept track of continuing education. I think this is the count. And we always had someone here, many of you will recognize in the foreground, even though our heads turned away, Shannon Roy from the State Library. This was at our 1997 annual meeting, which was in November at that time, giving a continuing education certificate to Barbara Shoup from Neodesha, who Sharon met yesterday when we were in Neodesha. She just happened to be in the library. She's been retired, I think she said, since 2003, but she was in the library. And there I am, and a young me, would have been a 40-year-old me, I guess, at that time. And Skip Childress in the foreground. She was our, I believe, our secretary of the executive board at that time. Here's a system meeting from the mid-1990s. There are a few probably recognizable faces there if you look closely. I'm pretty sure this is, let's see, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but I'm pretty sure this is Andrea Soba here. And this is definitely Virginia Pedroja here in the front row. And Virginia just retired in April, so most of you know her. And there are a few others who I think I know. This may be Kathy Hale back here. I'm not real positive. Anyway, an interesting picture there. We just had him at that time in the back room. This was before the renovation. This is our Apple group from, I think, 2011, working on the budget portion of our training there. Here's a more recent meeting. This was at Westminster Woods in 2014. And this was an interesting one. I attended the Public Library Association conference in Indianapolis in 2014, along with Sandy Wilkerson and Kim Rutter from our staff. And then there are several Central Kansas Library staff members there as well. We went out to eat together in the evening, and we were talking, and obviously talking library things, and we were overheard at the next table. And when it came time for, if waitress asked if we wanted dessert, she says, your dessert is paid for anyone who wants dessert. And we asked who, and she pointed to the lady at the table just a little ways from us. And so we thanked her, and we found out she was Mary Kay Andrews, the author. That's her pseudonym. I don't remember what her real name is. So we asked her if she would come over and take a picture with all of it. But as an author, she'd been there to speak at the conference, and she'd overheard us. We were obviously librarians. She wanted to show her appreciation for librarians, and so we were the recipient of that goodwill. So that was a fun time. Stop sharing the screen now and finish up here. Unfortunately, not allowing much time as I had hoped for comments. I didn't know I was going to talk quite this. I didn't know my notes were this lengthy. I do want to say, Sharon, take note. As you heard, SEK has only had 3 directors, and all 3 of them retired in the job. No one has ever left SEK as director for any reason other than retirement. And in fact, for Iola Public Library, in just 7 more years, it will have been a full century since the library director left without retiring. Just 4 people, the same 3 of us who were also SEK directors, and then one other who began work in 1928 and worked until Lucille Wagner started. So just 4 of us cover 93 years. So just beware, Sharon. I get questions a lot about my retirement plan, so I'm going to share that now. I am staying in Iola. I hope to do a lot more reading, but I have to say, frankly, over the past 10 years or so, I can't read for any length of time without getting drowsy and going to sleep. So I don't know how much more reading I'll actually get in, but I look forward to having at least the opportunity to try. Maybe it'll just mean more naps, which that's okay too, I guess. One major thing I want to do, some of you know that I do the Kansas Periodical Index. I've been doing that since 1984. I did it in print for a number of years. It's online now. The state library pays for that to be available statewide. And I'm going to keep that up, and in fact fill in some of the back years that are not in the online index. So I'm going to be spending a lot of time on that. I do expect to be doing a lot more traveling. That's frankly one of the reasons why I'm retiring now earlier than I might have, earlier than I once thought I would, because in recent years I've found myself increasingly kind of resenting that I have to be back on a certain deadline and have to try to fit things. I have to tightly schedule things in that I want to do on the way to fit when I can leave and when I have to be back, and not be able to take time for a side trip here or there for something I see along the road. I'm looking forward to just going and not having that deadline. Some of you knew that I was scheduled to take a trip overseas, my first overseas trip to Germany and Poland this fall. Unfortunately, because of the COVID situation in Europe, those flights got canceled. They decided they couldn't really reschedule the tour group that I was going to be with, which was a small tour group, but nevertheless, so it's postponed until next year. I will be going next year with a very close friend of mine from college. I expect to do some volunteer work, especially, given my history interest with the Allen County Historical Society, possibly other ways. Shorter term, I have some shorter term things. I was asked late last year to serve on a committee for planning the 50+1 anniversary celebration for Miller Library at McPherson College, so I'll be involved in that. In 1982, I'd published a history book of my home county, Osage County, and people have been asking about reprinting that. The Historical Society in Osage County wants to do that, and I put that off to talk about after I retired, so I need to do that. And then just some deferred things that I've deferred this spring because I haven't had time, like treating my deck and stuff like that. But anyway, that's an idea. I'm going to miss you all. That's what I'm going to miss most of all. People have asked me what I'm going to miss, and that's it, the people. I will say that because of that, if you were at the forum a month ago, I offered to come out and give some of the programs that I gave here at Iola Public Library as public programs on history, called the amateur. I give the put it under the rubric the amateur history guy, because I'm kind of a history guy, but an amateur. I've never worked professionally, not even teaching it in the field. But I've developed 5 programs that I'd be willing to come and give in your libraries. I will eventually post this on, put a post on our Facebook page, but just to go over them, it's a noted and notorious Kansans, World War I, presidents, which is kind of a presidential trivia program, presidential elections, the history of presidential elections, and then key moments in American history. And I have actually gone a minute over time. I'm sorry. Is this, we have about 14 minutes, I guess, till the next session starts. Can we take 5 minutes in case somebody does want to question or comment? You think we can afford that?
Sure.
And I know there have been some comments in the chat that I haven't been following as I've been going along. So anyone want to unmute and
You have lots of well
ask
wishes,
questions or
Roger.
comments?
You have lots of well wishes in the chat, so if you'd like, we can save it for you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that gets saved in the recording. I kind of think it doesn't. But yeah, if it could be saved, that would be great. Yeah, I'm seeing some of them now. Well, if no one has anything they want to ask or make audible comments, we can go in this. And is the room just staying open for